Africa, let's not again ever in their presence applaud sanctions. They are crippling our economy. They are damaging our countries. They are immersing us into deep poverty. Only an illiterate person, a dumb person, politically, is the person who can applaud sanctions or call upon sanctions or wish for sanctions upon his or her nation. Don't be that parochial. Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, all over Africa. Today, welcome again to another episode of the African Political House. But before we delve deep, let me remind you, don't forget to like, share, comment, and above all, subscribe to this channel so that we can keep on enlightening one another. And also don't forget to check my previous videos where I was talking about President Traore and where other presidents are not willing to do what Traore is doing. And also I ridiculed, or rather I opposed the notion of democracy. Go and check why I was saying so. You can also get some enlightenment from there. So before I delve deep into this subject or discussion of the day, let me read for you some interesting statistics. Then from there, we shall delve deep into the conversation. Well, so in 2023 alone, food prices in Niger rose to about 45% in just 3 months. This was not because of war, but because of sanctions meant to restore democracy. But who is going hungry? Of course, the answer is they are not the presidents or those who are in power or the military juntas or whosoever is in command, but rather the common people are the ones that are suffering. Right? The common people are the ones that are suffering. Which brings us to the discussion or the question: are sanctions necessary for African development? Are they going to bring change into Africa? So allow me to take you through this discussion in segments. So the first segment, of course, we are going to look at sanctions naturally. Are they really meant or are meant for humanity good? So one thing that we need to understand when it comes to sanctions is that sanctions are a tool of political interest, especially in the global stage, in international relations, in global politics. Most of the companies, most of the countries that impose sanctions on other countries, it's not like they care a lot about the population of that country, but they are advancing their own agendas. They are advancing their own interests. This is for the benefit of the sanction imposing country, not for the majority in the recipient country. That's a no. Right? Of course, they claim that sanctions are there to promote democracy and human rights. But of course, if you check my previous video, I trashed democracy completely, especially in Africa, if not worldwide. Then human rights. Who is the prefect of human rights? That is another question for another day. That is another discussion for another day. But now, when these sanctions come to Africa, as I said before, who suffers? Of course, the majority, the common people suffer, right? And when we check on this, those who these sanctions are targeting, they have a lot of ways to evade them. So mostly when sanctions are being imposed on a country, they are supposedly targeting those in power, the military commanders, the president, the minister, and etc. But remember, these people, they have all capacities or all ways of evading these sanctions, which we are going to discuss in this video. So stay tuned, don't drop for now. Okay, so but from a realistic point of view, sanctions are just a tool for power, not morality. It's not about moral, because if sanctions were for morality, trust me, when the sanction imposing states realize that the common people are suffering, they would revise them or maybe come up with other measures. But the fact that they keep on imposing those sanctions, it means they don't care about your struggle. What they care is what is their nation gaining from it. So it's very sad when opposition leaders in African countries, they go and beg for sanctions upon their countries. I remember very well before I started politics, I used to think sanctions are going to restore hope or something. It's a tool of hope. But shock on me, I realized the outcome was totally the opposite. Right? So now, my another question is, are sanctions a strategy or a civilian case? Are they a strategy or a civilian case? So these, as I said before, sanctions are imposed for political gain, not justice. Power states usually use them to control or punish weak regimes. So, for example, because we do not understand the politics, we get to be told sanctions are meant to restore order, they are meant to restore democracy. But as I said before, what is democracy? Is it needed in Africa? According to me, as an African citizen, that's trash. We don't need democracy in Africa. Go and check my previous video. Right. So, of course, now when these sanctions are imposed on Africa, who suffers most? Of course, now the population, the African population, is the one that suffers more than those targeted by these sanctions. Right. So the ordinary citizen, as I said, they suffer more. So the realistic truth in this is that humanitarian suffering is a collateral damage. So in as much as these sanctions are meant to make these political leaders who want to be heady, who want to be heady, like who are tough, they are meant to be made, they want those people to bow down. But now you see, they are not just going to affect only the politician, they are also coming and extending to normal people, to the common person like me. Okay? But they don't care. But the common people, unfortunately, think sanctions are there to save them. That's a false view, a false perspective. So we need to wake up, Africans. Sanctions are not going to save us, but rather they are damaging our economies, our political systems, our institutions more and more. Since when did these sanctions were imposed on Africa? I don't know how many decades now, approaching to centuries, to a century, but there has not been any positive outcome. But rather we are seeing our economies, our situation getting worse and worse. Right. Now, so the human cost of sanctions in Africa, I'm going to give you a few examples. For example, in Zimbabwe, Zimbabwe has been under sanctions from independence. And what are the results right now? If sanctions were meant to restore order or to restore good governance, right now we are seeing this consistent hyperinflation, not just inflation, hyperinflation. Go and search the word, what it means. I'm not going to explain it. Healthcare system has declined, and the truth, it's not some kind of assumption. I am a Zimbabwean, and I can tell you, sanctions have brought down the economy. Yes, I'm not declining the fact that also our local leaders are they have a hand in all this. But I'm also blaming sanctions, because today the subject is on sanctions. Don't tell me what about their input. I know they've also given their hand into that situation, but today I'm just touching it from a sanction point of view. Another good example is Sudan. Frozen aid, of course we don't need aid, it's a perspective, but I'm just aiding because I know some of you still believe in aid that is going to redeem Africa. So there's frozen aid, hospital, like basic supplies. Why? Because of sanctions. Yes, these sanctions, who started this? The leaders. So the leaders attracted sanctions, but it's not going to solve. There should be a better solution than imposing sanctions, because you are harming the innocent people. In Niger, I've already mentioned in my introduction that food security after ECOWAS sanctions. ECOWAS imposed sanctions on Niger because there was military takeover. But did that help the situation? Of course, no. And what happened next? We know that Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso exited the ECOWAS. We're going to discuss on that the other day. So, when sanctions are put upon a country, the elites, the rulers, those in power, they survive. But who suffers? The citizens. This one we should agree. If you have sanctions in your country, you can literally tell. Or if you're a neighboring country, if you're a critical thinker, tell what is happening in your neighboring country. That is the impact of sanctions. All right. So now, I'm just going to give you quick statistics here. The United Nations estimates that in 2023, over 80% of Zimbabweans live below the poverty line, a crisis that was worsened by 2 decades of sanctions, 20 years, over 20 years of sanctions. Right now, 80% of Zimbabweans, this is according to the United Nations statistics, as of 2023, they are living under the poverty. As of South Sudan, before the 2023 conflict, US sanctions restricted financial transactions, contributing to a shortage of life-saving medical equipment in 70% of the hospitals. But remember, the elites whom the sanctions are targeting, these guys, they fly outside to get foreign treatment. Who is supposed to be in these hospitals? Of course, really? Of course, the common people are the ones attending, or rather getting medical attention from these hospitals. Right. Then, the World Bank also reported that countries under prolonged sanctions experience a GDP contraction of up to 25% within 5 years. Contraction. And when we talk about contraction, those who did economics, or even if you did not do economics, expansion, contraction. So when we talk of contraction, we are talking about the economy is shrinking, is struggling. So it's contracting by 25% within 5 years. Now think of it, how would Zimbabwe survive such a situation for the past 20 years? You get the answer. Now, when ECOWAS imposed sanctions upon Niger in 2023, it resulted in a 45% rise in food prices within 3 months, while the military junta remained firmly in power. So, the sanctions were imposed, but the military junta, whom the sanctions were targeting, remained in power. But the common people are the ones suffering, right? So now, I want to touch on an interesting question. Who suffers, or rather, how the targeted evade these sanctions? Number one, so these guys, they use offshore accounts, smuggling, and illicit trade. We all know very well that because these are the people who are in power, they can do anything to make sure they get what they want, no matter at whose expense. So that's how you find that our elite leaders, they have offshore accounts to try and evade these sanctions at the expense of the common people, right? They build black markets to sustain themselves. Actually, some of the black markets, either for money or for anything, they are a result of all these sanctions, whatever thing that we're talking about right now. Then thirdly, they weaponize because they are leading people. I told you, governance, especially democracy, is the rule of the illiterate. We do not understand what sanctions are and how global politics go about. So these same leaders, because they understand all these things, they weaponize these sanctions for propaganda, and they will tell you the country is going down right now because of sanctions. Even if they're the ones who are messing up the country, they will blame it on sanctions. And because we are not well educated, we are not well enlightened in this area, we just blame sanctions. So this is the third way they evade sanctions and weaponize it. Even they use it as a weapon. So now, at the end of the day, after sanctions are imposed, you are toughening these guys more than ever before. So you end up with a greater authoritarian grip and elite protection. Sanctions is not a tool to save Africa, right? Now let's talk about the opposite dilemma, right? Should African opposition leaders call for sanctions? And when I'm talking about opposition leaders, I'm not just talking about the immediate political opposition leaders, but even interest groups. Should they call for sanctions upon a country? The best answer to that is no. Although it depends on under which circumstance or under which conditions should they call for sanctions upon a country. Why am I saying the best answer is no? It is actually a high risk, right? Why? Because it has, if you're an opposition leader, it hurts your supporters. Because when the economy is crippled, who is going to be hurt is the supporter. Right? Not the rulers that are intending to experience the pain of this sanction. Then it fuels state propaganda. So you are even giving these people who are abusing human rights more tool for propaganda. More tools for propaganda. Like it's a tool for propaganda, as I said before. Then it undermines your political legitimacy. Because if you are someone who is leaning on external forces to bring sanctions upon your country, especially upon your fellow brothers, upon your fellow mothers and your fellow people, your supporters, then you are a weak politician. So those people who understand politics better, the moment you open your mouth calling sanctions upon your country, then it literally shows that you cannot be a leader. So to people who are critical thinkers, the moment an opposition leader calls for sanctions upon his country, it's a red flag. So, but we have some other situations in which sanctions are justified. For example, we have extreme cases like genocide, then crimes against humanity. When people are killing each other like nobody's business, and maybe the government has gone rogue and is killing people, let's say, especially in multi-ethnic setups where the leader is killing another ethnic group. Maybe in that case, yes, this is where a situation in which we need to call for an external intervention, maybe through sanctions, but there should be a better solution to that. I do insist. Right. So it must actually include humanitarian exceptions. So if sanctions are to come, maybe they should target those culprits, but in a way that is well calculated, that at the end of the day, it's not going to end up affecting the common citizen. Are we learning? If we are learning, just say, yes, we are learning. Type something in the comment section. So, do we have other alternatives? Or rather, before I go there, sanctions for them to be, maybe, in case they are imposed, there's no other option, they should be monitored every time. Are they really having impact on the targeted culprits, or rather they are affecting the common people? If we find that they are affecting the common people, why should they remain in position? They should be removed. Yeah, they should be recalled. So, but at the end of this discussion, what I just want to say is, yes, sanctions seem like they can provide solution, but we need to have alternatives to this. We need to have alternatives to this. Africa, let's not again ever in their presence applaud sanctions. They are crippling our economy. They are damaging our countries. They are immersing us into deep poverty. Only an illiterate person, a dumb person, politically, is the person who can applaud sanctions or call upon sanctions or wish for sanctions upon his or her nation. Don't be that parochial. Wake up, Africa, and get to understand how things are going on in your country. So in conclusion, as I've said, sanctions are a realist tool. They are not meant to bring salvation to Africa. They are not meant to save Africa. They are not meant to save you and I, but rather it's a realistic power tool, helping Western powers or the sanction-able imposing countries to remain gripping to power at the expense of the majority. So I guess you have learned. Again, I said, do not forget to like, share, and subscribe. Until we meet next time, it's a goodbye.